Alright, so this is the video of how we solve quadratics by factoring. And so we will need to solve quadratics for the last half of chapter 10, which is why we're going over this. Hopefully this is review from Algebra 1, but if not, we're going to teach it just like you have never seen it, okay? So, first of all, the standard equation of a quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Okay. Now notice our a is always the coefficient in front of our x squared, our b is always the coefficient of x, and our c is always the number without a variable in it. Okay, so we're going to do some things with this a, b, and c to help us solve this. Okay, now a few tips for factoring. The first is that the equation must be equal to 0. Okay, so like here it's equal to 0. If it's not, we need to rearrange the equation and make it equal to 0. Okay, the second one is before we factor, okay, we must pull out a GCF, or a greatest common factor. Okay, so before we factor using the box method, which is the way I'm going to show you, we have to pull out a GCF. And guys, we'll have examples of each one of these, so hopefully it'll make more sense if you're way confused. Okay, the last two, these two go together. Okay, they go hand in hand. Okay, so two scenarios have to take place. The first one is that the two number we use to factor, it must multiply to a times c. Okay, and that same two numbers must add to b. Okay, now I don't tell you a lot in this class that you have to memorize something, but these you do just have to memorize. Okay, so for example, two numbers have to multiply to a times c, and they have to add to b. So let's say, for example, a times c is 6 and b is 7. Okay, so you want two numbers that multiply to 6 and add to 7. Well, those two numbers would be plus 1 and plus 6. Okay, because if you multiply 1 and 6, you get 6. If you add 1 plus 6, you get 7. Okay, hopefully that'll make more sense after we do some examples. All right, let's look at example 1 here. Okay, now I'm going to pull out, and you won't have to do this a lot, but for the first couple, I'm going to pull out my a, my b, and my c. Okay, so remember the a is the number in front of the x squared, and when there's no number, we can think of this as like 1x squared. My b is the number in front of my x, and my c is the number that doesn't have a variable in it. Now, anytime you have a minus rather than a plus, think of that as a negative number. Okay, so my a here is 1, my b is going to be negative 6, and my c is going to be negative 7. Okay, so I want two numbers that multiply to a times c and add to b. Okay, well notice my a times c is just 1 times negative 7, which is a negative 7, and my b is negative 6. Okay, so what two numbers can you think of that when you multiply them they equal negative 7, when you add them they equal negative 6? Okay, well hopefully negative 7 and positive 1 comes to mind, because negative 7 times 1 is negative 7, negative 7 plus 1 is negative 6. Okay, so what we're going to do here, and this might be kind of confusing, but hear me out, it'll make sense, is we're going to keep everything the same, but we're going to change this minus 6x, and we're going to incorporate this minus 7 and the plus 1. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite this equation. Now my x squared stays the same. I'm going to leave some room. My minus 7 stays the same, and this is going to equal to 0. Okay, now rather than writing minus 6x, I'm going to use these two numbers. Okay, I'm going to say minus 7x and plus 1x are just a plus x. Okay, now I want you to compare this and this, and I want you to recognize that these are the same thing. They're the same equation, just written differently. Instead of writing my minus 6x, I wrote it as minus 7x plus x, which if you reduce that, it is just minus 6x. Now, the reason I did this is because now this expression on the left has 4 terms in it, right? It has an x squared, a negative 7x, an x, and a negative 7. Okay, and I'm going to put those 4 terms in these 4 smaller boxes within a box down here. Okay, so my x squared is always in the top left, and the thing without a variable is always down here. And then I'm going to fill in my minus 7x and my plus x right here. Okay, that's why I changed it from 3 terms to 4. Now, I always start with this column right here, and up and down I'm going to look and say, okay, what's my GCF? What's my greatest common factor among these two things? Now remember, my greatest common factor is what number or what variable or what number and variable do both of these have in common. Okay, so you should immediately think, well, they both have an x in it. Okay, now after I get this first one, I'm going to look at this as an area model. Okay, you did area models back in like elementary school. So you're thinking, if the area of this box here is x squared and this side is x, what number can we multiply this side to get the x squared? Okay, so this has to be an x2 because x times x equals x squared. Okay, now I'm going to move over to this box. So if this is x, right, because we said it's x right here, if this is x and this area is negative 7x squared, what number has to be up here? Well, that's a negative 7 because x times a negative 7 is negative 7x. Okay, same thing down here. If this is an x, right, what does this have to be to where I multiply it equals x? Well, that's just a 1. Okay, and the way that I check myself is if I did all this right, my negative 7 times a positive 1 should be negative 7, and it is. Okay, now here and here are my factors. Okay, so this factors into x minus 7 and x plus 1. Okay, now seriously, if you FOIL this out, what you'll get is this right here. Okay, if you don't believe me, go ahead and do it. All right, now we want to think, okay, hard part's done. Now we want to think, all right, how can I multiply this number times this number and it'll equal to 0? Okay, the only time I multiply 2 numbers and it equals to 0 is when one of the 2 numbers has to be 0. Okay, so I asked myself, when is x minus 7 equal to 0? Okay, well, to solve for x, I just plus 7. My x has to equal 7. Okay, and then I want to do the same thing over here. When is x plus 1 equal to 0? Okay, minus 1, x equals negative 1. So I have 2 solutions here. My solutions are x equals negative 1 and 7. That's my final answer. All right, let's look at example 2 now. Okay, now when I look at example 2, I notice that it is not equal to 0. So I want to make it equal to 0. Okay, so in order to make it equal to 0, all I'm going to do is subtract 3x from both sides. Okay, and I'm left with x squared plus 14x plus 40 is going to equal to 0. Okay, now we're in business because I have this equal to 0. All right, so once again, I want to find the 2 numbers that when I multiply, they multiply to a times c, and when I add them, they add to b. Okay, so my a here, the number in front of my x squared, is just 1. My b here is a positive 14, and my c here is 40. Okay, so 2 numbers that multiply to a times c, 1 times 40, is just 40. And they add to b, and my b is 14. So what 2 numbers, when I multiply them, they multiply to 40, and when I add them, they add to 14. Okay, well, hopefully a positive 10 and a positive 4 come to mind, because 10 times 4 is 40, 10 plus 4 is 14. All right, so now remember, I'm going to change this equation here to where it has 4 terms. I'm going to use this plus 10 and plus 4, and I'm going to use that to write plus 14. Okay, so I can rewrite this as x squared, I'm going to leave some room, plus 40 equals to 0. Now, and rather than saying plus 14x, I'm going to say plus 10x and plus 4x. Okay, So now I have x squared plus 10x plus 14x plus 40 is equal to 0. And the reason I did that is because now I have 4 terms, and I can put them in each of the smaller boxes here. Okay, now once again, I'm going to look at this right here. Up and down, I'm going to say, okay, what's my common factor of x squared and 4x? Well, the only thing they both have in common is my x. And then I'm going to look at this as an area model. Okay, so if the area of this is x squared and this is x, this side here has to be x as well. Okay, and if this side is x, that means this side is x. And if this here is 4x, I'd have to multiply my x by 10 to get 10x. Okay, same thing down here. If I know this side is x, because that's what it says right here, and this area is 4x, this would have to be 4. And if I did it right, 4 times 10 gives me 40, and yes, it does. Okay, so here's my factors. So I can factor this here, this whole thing, to x plus 10 and x plus 4, and that's going to equal 0. Okay, now I want to ask myself, when does x plus 10 equal to 0? And when does x plus 4 equal to 0? Okay, well, x plus 10 equals 0. We could subtract 10 from both sides when x is minus 10. And over here, I could subtract 4 from both sides, and x would be negative 4. So my solutions, I'd have 2, is x is negative 4 and negative 10. Here's my final answer. Okay, let's look at example 3 now. All right, so I first notice it's not equal to 0, so I want to make it equal to 0. So all I'd have to do is add 1 to both sides. Okay, so 6x squared minus 42x plus 72 is equal to 0. All right, now this one I can pull out a GCF. Okay, so what number does 6, 42, and 72, what number is a factor of all 4 of those? Okay, you should notice that all 3 of these are multiples of 6. So we can factor out a 6, and I'm left with x squared minus 7x plus, that's 12, equals to 0. Okay, now my 6 is out of the way. Now all I need to focus on is my x squared minus 7x plus 12. Okay, so I want 2 numbers that multiply to a times c. Well, a is 1, c is 12. So 2 numbers that multiply to 12 and add to b, which is negative 7. Okay, so I want you to go ahead and pause this video here, and I want you to find the 2 numbers that multiply to 12, add to negative 7. Okay, I want you to rewrite this, okay, to 4 terms, right? Put it in the box and see if you can factor it out and solve for x. You should get 2 different solutions, and then we'll go over it. So go ahead, pause this, try the rest by yourself, and then we'll go over it. All right, so the 2 numbers that multiply to positive 12 add to negative 7, you should have gotten negative 3 and negative 4. Okay, so when you rewrote this, you should have gotten 6 parentheses, x squared minus 3x minus 4x plus 12 equals 0. Okay, you should have put each term in the box, so x squared minus 3x minus 4x, positive 12. Okay, x and x, minus 3 minus 4, here are my factors. Okay, so you're left with 6 parentheses, x minus 3, x minus 4 equals to 0. Okay, now when is x minus 3 equal to 0? Well, when x is 3. And when is x minus 4 equal to 0? When x is 4. So 3 and 4 should be your solutions here.